Welcome to Command Control Power. We are very honored to be joined this week by Charles Edge of Jamf Software, and probably better known for Cryptid.com. I'm sure you've all been there. So thanks, Charles, for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And I guess right off the top, I'm wondering what you're working on these days. I know you've got a big super secret project in the works. What's going on over at Jamf?
Well, the thing that we're most open and discussing is that I'm involved in is Bushel. And Bushel is device management for smaller organizations. So 5, 10, 20 people and 5, 10, or 20 person work groups within larger organizations.
Why is it limited to small work groups? Is there a specific kind of niche market there, or?
Well, technically, it could easily be scaled up to 10, 20,000, no problem. In fact, we would love to have a 10,000 customer as a seat customer. But there is one pretty massive caveat, which is that all settings go to all users. So as you get into much larger organizations, you need tiered administration, and we're not building that. So it's more of a technical limitation in the sense of feature sets than it is in the sense of the actual technology itself.
And that's by design to make it simplified for the smaller business type? Is that what you're thinking?
Absolutely, yeah. And I have to caveat this with the fact that Bushel is in beta, so there might be some spots where I can't say anything. But yeah, from a user experience standpoint, if you start stripping away buttons for example, users, groups, et cetera, then you make products much, much simpler to use. So the target here is for example, a consultant to be able to roll into a customer, set them up with Bushel, and then let the customer manage it themselves without having to call every time they need to, buy a new app. Obviously, if a consultant wants to be called every time they need to buy a new app, they can do that. But the goal is to allow non-technical people to manage a whole bunch of Apple devices.
And would part of this design be as well to make the barrier to entry lower from a financial standpoint, where maybe people who couldn't afford the full-blown Jamf product might be able to get into Bushel and, as a stepping stone, perhaps?
Absolutely. It's a flat fee, a flat monthly fee per user, per device, or per device, not per user, and no jumpstart required. So as you guys mentioned before we kicked off this, one of the barriers of entry to larger products is some of them aren't customer installable and or require professional services. So with Bushel, there's no professional services. So you just jump on in there, create an APNS cert, and you're managing devices in about 5 minutes.
I'm not sure if you heard me cheer about the lack of the jump start, so that's cool.
For Casper, I used to do a lot of jump starts in my previous life at 318, and I do have to say that the jump starts are incredibly valuable for a lot of different reasons, not just getting used to Casper, but also learning how to do things like packaging and other things that you might not know how to do at scale. So they are useful in that correct size organization for Casper, but when you get into these much smaller environments, then they're not really necessary. So.
Oh, sure. I mean, I totally understand the process of going through that jumpstart, just because if you were just to leave even a consultant that's well versed in it just to his own devices, you need that kind of guidance to build the product into what it is. It has a lot of powerful capabilities. So I totally get it. I mean, we're busting chops, but the jumpstart is definitely a necessity to kind of make it worth their while so that they know all the ins and outs of the product.
Yeah, totally.
With Bushel, obviously, you guys saw that area of need for smaller businesses. I mean, I know when I used to talk to people and things like that, I'd say, well, Casper Suite is great. It might not work for you because we deal with a lot of small companies as well. So this is a real cool thing to see that just popped out from you guys, because I can think of a few clients right off the bat that would be perfect for. I mean, I know right now it's in beta, but it's exciting to see.
Yeah, thanks. We're pretty excited about it too.
So when that's ready to go, maybe we can have you back at some point too. And I know that there's been a lot of people, we've gotten a lot of feedback in the last week or so. We've been sort of teasing them that you're going to be on the show, and we've been really prodded to get a Q&A with you. So
Oh, a live show. That sounds fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm totally open to it.
A lot of needy consultants out there, Charles.
Including me.
Who do you turn to?
So we mentioned briefly cryptid.com at the beginning of the show, and that's been just sort of an invaluable resource to all us consultants, myself in the field, and just looking for solutions to a lot of problems that sort of crop up along the way, especially when you're working with server. But speaking about Cryptid, how did that get its start, and what's your sort of motivation to sort of share all this intellectual property you have so openly?
Yes. I can't keep it in my head, or my head starts to hurt. So the original motivation. So Cryptid.com used to be just like a collection of my stuff. And then I got a call one day from the publisher of my first book, which was on Tiger Server. And he was like, you really need a website that isn't just, a bunch of lines of really silly text. So I built a WordPress blog that night, and then I started writing. And at first it was maybe an article every month, and then it became weekly, and the next thing I knew, I was publishing much longer diatribes. I used to do a lot more stuff with personal things like football, and then one of my employees at 318 told me, you should really stop posting about football. So no more sports ball, right? But yeah, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago I started doing when Apple went to the annual release, and I wasn't really sure what the future of publishing books about server was. I started doing the guides for each of the releases of the server. That was right around the time the Xserve got retired, and yeah, it's I think it did 210,000 uniques last month. So
wow.
It does its own
tremendous.
thing. Yeah, and no real paid advertising. So it just is my hobby.
Now, did you always have the byline "Tiny Death Stars of Foulness," or is that new?
That comes and goes. So a few years ago, when I drink, I have a tendency of making frat boy remarks, because I was in a fraternity once upon a time. And a friend of mine, I was speaking at a conference in Sweden, and a friend, Duncan McCracken, brought his now wife. And she called my little comments "tiny Death Stars of foulness." So.
So that speaks to you. I thought it was speaking to Mac Server, but
no, it's about me.
Okay.
For better or worse.
There's something just really pragmatic about those sort of guides you mentioned. When a new version of server comes out, Apple just dumps a bunch of material out there as well sometimes. But there's something really just comforting walking through the setup screens with a professional, like you guiding us through, like, now you're going to want to click here. It's okay if this happens, or, sometimes there's even I'm trying to think of some gotchas I've seen in the past, like where a reboot might be a good idea, things like that.
How to reset your profile manager database, how to reset the server app if you get screwed up. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Really, really helpful stuff. And it makes you feel like you're kind of like, working with somebody, side by side, taking you through all the screens. It's really helpful.
Thanks. Thank you. I hopefully books, the publishing industry is changing so rapidly. So hopefully at some point soon, I'll be able to get that stuff out in a much wider sense, like in a book as it's being published, kind of like what they were trying to do with Safari Rough Cuts at O'Reilly. That would kind of be my preference, because with Cryptid, there's really no editorial. So, I write it and it goes out, and then if someone makes a comment or emails me or tweets me, as Eric Dreyer does, which I love, by the way, then I can go back and I can change the text if I mess something up or had a spelling error or something wrong in the command line. But yeah, it's it is what it is, right?
So scrolling through, I see obviously the occasional like one-liner, for example. See how long the active user has logged in on a Mac, and you've just got a little, like well-written one-liner there, and it just does what it says on the tin. Is this like other sort of authors I've read where it's really like it's kind of like your knowledge base, your own personal knowledge base?
Yeah. At 318, I had two going, or three. I had the 318 blog, and then I had mine, and then I had an internal one that was stuff that was much more customer centric. What is the setup at X client or Y client? At one point, much more went into the internal knowledge base, and then over time I just realized that there's no value in having it internal. The value is having it external, because then it gets picked up by SEO basically. So everything ended up at some point going public facing, except for extremely customer specific information.
Very cool.
Do you still feel now you've been at Jamf for a little under a year now? Do you find that sort of has changed in terms of your availability to continue the cryptid website, or do you think you have enough time in your busy day to still give it some time and attention?
That's TBD. I mean, I've managed to keep up with it. The Yosemite articles were pretty much 0 day or within the first week of release to get out there on the site. There's still maybe 2 that I plan on going back and doing. And I've been keeping up with it so far, but I've also been writing blog.bushel.com, a lot of the posts there. So that's maybe 50 posts in the last month and a half or 2.
Wow.
And so, as I do technical writing there and then, go home, I don't know how much time I'll have. Right now, I put my daughter to bed at 7:30 or 8, so I've got 4 or 5 hours before I go to bed that I can fart around. So,
have you ever thought of doing a John Syracuse style Mac OS X server review?
No. And I love the fact that John does that, but and I sent him an email recently about this. I try to keep cryptid, with the exception of nerd movies, to be extremely just pragmatic and technical. No opinions. There very rarely have been. No politics. Maybe the occasional blurb about football 5-10 years ago, but but other than that, it is fact, not opinion, if that makes sense, and that's by design. I've considered creating a pseudonym to write elsewhere about my opinions, but never got around to it.
So it sounds like there's a sort of philosophical, belief there, or a decision that you're making not to, I guess, pontificate on what Apple's up to or what the direction the server's going and things like that. I mean, is that what it's all about, or is it just?
Yeah. Pretty much. I mean, about once a year, I'll be speaking at a conference and I'll say something kind of opinion related, and it'll get tweeted. And so I had no knowledge of a few things, but I've made some prognostications that came true, and then people are like, "Oh, well, who did you talk to at Apple that told you that?" And so rather than have those things crop up, I try to just be very, fact-based, walkthrough-based.
That probably makes a lot of sense. I mean, you are at times, I'm sure, privy to some sensitive information, and you don't want to mistakenly let something slip or make it even think that you let something slip. So just taking that approach is much better.
Yeah, I do feel like I've never let anything slip, but the observation that I could, I think, is the concern behind not doing that, if that makes sense. So it's important for me. I'm involved in a lot of weird things, so it's important for me that I maintain those avenues where no one ever thinks that there's a chance that I could have done anything with, not to knock them, but a 9-to-5 Mac or something about what's next, if that makes sense. So,
well, if you ever start writing under that pseudonym, you got to let us know
what it is.
What it is.
Chuck Q. Farley, right?
So we spoke a little earlier about your OS server book. So just to point people to the right place, if you go to takecontrolbooks.com, you can see the book Charles has written, Take Control of OS 10 Server. And it's an ebook, and you can get it there. And it's this book, from what I understand from the interview, you did a great video interview with Chuck Joyner on Mac Voices, that this is really focused on the homesumer. Am I correct in that assumption with this most recent one?
Yeah, I've found that OS 10 Server as a product has been going down market steadily for a few years. So
that's a nice way to put it, isn't it? Down market.
I think it's accurate. We did OS 10 Server in the enterprise with A-Press. I don't remember what that was, maybe Lion or Mountain Lion. And then, a few years later, we're doing OS 10 Server for O'Reilly, and that was for the small business, I would say. Right. And now we're doing OS 10 Server for the homesumer, as you called it, which is an awesome term I haven't heard before. And so I think that's just kind of a reflection of where the server is going. It is still used in lots of enterprises, whether it's as an XAMPP metadata controller for talking heads video or whether it's for a caching server. But the traditional uses of a server, like file sharing and things of that nature, they're just much different solutions for those things these days. So,
right. So we've and I guess the second part to that question is we've all been off in the weeds with either Profile Manager or something really going haywire with some of the more recent versions of server. And so, did you have any kind of trepidation with sort of pointing this product at the home user? Because when people make videos, there's a great guy who makes videos on YouTube, and I'm blanking out on his name. And it all seems really groovy, like he goes through each step of, turning on each service and how you set it up, and this is the way it works, and boom, it just works. But we all know, as consultants, that, it just doesn't always work that way, especially when you're, upgrading. So.
As a product manager, I can say that every product works great in a walled garden. The challenge is when the ecosystem gets larger and suddenly you have client systems of different operating systems and different subnets and things like that are tapping in. I tried really hard, and Adam Inkst was really helpful in this regard when we were working on the Take Control book to just put right up front in some of the chapters. If you're a home user, you probably shouldn't be doing this. But since you might, we're going to help you, but we're going to tell you again and again and again not to. For example, mail servers. I think we have a paragraph in that chapter about we're not sure it's really socially responsible for us to go into this, but it's more socially responsible for us to go into this than not. Because, if you're running a mail server at home, then there's a much higher chance that I'm going to get Viagra spam from you than if you're not.
Sure.
So in some cases, we went into a few places where we weren't sure that we should have. We didn't cover imaging at all because it's just not very home related at all. But we did cover mail services and web services and a few other things that could be construed as maybe not 100% a good idea. So.
Well, I think, people that are looking to do this, it's good to have the guidance of this book. I mean, you're not going to – you're taking a homesumer, as Jerry puts it, which you should patent that, by the way.
Yeah, totally.
And they're already searching the internet, scouring for answers on what they're looking to do. So if you have put something out there for them that lays out the different services and their pros and cons and how to configure them, you are being socially responsible. You're helping them get through that in a simplified manner, hopefully, as opposed to just finding some random website that might give them misinformation.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good thing in how you're presenting this to a smaller entity like a home user or even a small business.
Thanks. All the credit goes to Adam. He's awesome. I write very poorly, and he makes it look really good in the end. So
Adam's been using a Mac since 1982, I think. Is that right?
Wow.
Are we talking about Adam Inkst?
Yeah.
Yeah. They've been around since, I think, 2 years before the Mac was I don't know. I'm trying to make a joke, but they've been around since at least the beginning of
Sorry, Joe.
Mac. Come on, guys.
I would have inserted the canned laughter if I knew.
We all know 1984 was the year the Mac came out, right? So, okay.
So
moving on.
So I've worked with a lot of publishers, and I have to say that that they're some of the best in the business from an author standpoint. From just the quality of the product that they want to produce to the adorable married couple comments that you see in line in your text talking about grammar. It's like, you guys just had a little mini spat talking about, the Oxford comma or something like that.
That's great.
It's actually pretty awesome to see people that can work together for so long and make a really good run at it. So
Nice.
And I didn't know this, but the OS 10 server book that you put out was actually released to the Tidbits subscribers, right? In chapter or in series of chapters before it actually went
10 chapters. Each chapter, I think it ended up being 11 because we added a chapter at the end. It didn't feel right to just end the book with, oh, well, here's your last service. It's enabled. You're good to go. So we added a chapter at the end, again, at Adam's suggestion, that covered, here are some tips for managing and owning your server long term. And they released those, I think, one a week or one every other week for a period of time while we were working on the book. And the feedback from that went into the final. So it helped to get a few more eyes on editing the book.
That's a pretty smart idea.
Yeah, and it also was much more timely in terms of release. The book itself and the end result didn't come out until right around the time Yosemite dropped. So it was, if it weren't for that, it wouldn't have been very timely at all. But we're already, I'm about a third of the way through updating it to Yosemite right now. So
that's a question.
There should be an update coming out very shortly.
Yeah, that's a question actually that leads into something I was thinking about, which is, as an author, you put together this stuff, you work very hard, and it takes time. And with Apple's ongoing annual releases, do you find that difficult for each version to really produce a book in a timely fashion and get everything done before the next big thing comes out?
When every book's with a different publisher, absolutely. Because, you have to start over with your text. So you're just writing a whole new book. You're learning how a whole new set of publishers work, a whole new set of editors, new technical editors that have different things that they gripe about in the text. By the way, if you ever technically edit a book, be nice. It's not hard. And Adam is the nicest, by the way, because he was also technical editor in addition to a few other things. But I find that with this one, I probably could have updated it in a couple weeks if we decided for sure to do it in that period of time. I'm only about a week in, and I'm about a third of the way through. So hopefully it won't take that long.
That's not bad.
Yeah, the lion's share. So the configurator book I wrote a long time ago, I wrote it during a layover in an airport in Amsterdam, and then it proceeded to go into 4 to 5 months of editorial, and so it's like if you can just have that editorial process go by much quicker, which if you're just doing an update to a book, there's not that much text that changes, so it can go by much quicker, then you can get it out the door in a much more timely fashion. But the amount of time that it takes is very much dependent on that editorial cycle.
Do you have a favorite app that you do your writing in, your technical writing, Scrivener or?
Xcode, TextEdit. It's according to what the publisher wants. So the O'Reilly, the animal book that we did, that was in Markdown. So I ended up writing most of that in Xcode. With Pact and A-Press, it was all Microsoft Word. That's what they want. And then there are some special books, some special apps for EPUB that the Tidbits uses. So,
and people can find most of these books if they just go right to the homepage of cryptid.com in the right-hand sidebar, right? Most of the books are on the sidebar on Cryptid, and then the Amazon author page for me, I think, is pretty up to date. I think there's 12 of them now, something like that.
Wow, 12 books, and you are considering or in the process of possibly producing some new material?
Yep, there's 2 books in the works. So updating the Take Control book would be one. And then I'm working on a book about iOS security with Alistair Banks. And
that sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. And, there's things that you can and can't talk about or shouldn't talk about. So it becomes a much more interesting topic. But iOS, it's a very, very secure platform. So I find that a lot of publishers might ask you to sensationalize things. For example, there were a couple of attacks recently, or what were called attacks, but are really just development techniques. And so the media sensationalizes them, and the next thing you know, you've got publishers saying, let's write a book about this because it's hot in the media. And then they ask you to talk about that, and you're like, well, there's really nothing to talk about there. If you enter your password, you didn't get hacked. You just were stupid.
You get tricked.
Yeah, and I shouldn't say the word stupid, but a lot of the guys at 318 a long, long time ago used to make fun because I had a quote that it's not hacking if you know the password. And that's very, very true. So,
well, when do you expect that particular book to come out?
I would look forward in probably 2 to 3 months, according to what the editorial cycle is. Hopefully before iOS 9 comes out, because the whole thing has been written for iOS 8, of course. But there was just an update today, so it'll be interesting to see. With every update, you have to run through the text that you already wrote and make sure that there's no new screens, because back in the pre-Mountain Lion days, all point releases, none of the point releases really had new features or new buttons introduced. And these days, a point release can have a massive new feature sometimes. So the days of not having to replace all your screenshots are long behind us on a point release.
Yeah, I think that started back with was it Snow Leopard? 10.6.7, I think, got the App Store, and it was just oh, okay.
and 10.6.8 got server MGRD. Which,
right,
like all of a sudden licensing is a cluster, and you understood why when 10.7 dropped, but yeah, there have been some pretty major features introduced since then in point releases.
Yeah, I think one of the bigger ones was caching server too. That's true. Just popped in.
Yeah, and the number of connected users. I remember having to replace all the screenshots for that in one of the 10.7 releases, I think, because just randomly it showed back up after it had been pulled out, and you're like, oh, look, that's at least 7 new screenshots for replacing. Thanks, guys. And I know some of the people who write the code, so sometimes I blame them personally. I scream their name out when I'm in a client. They're like, what?
By the way, Charles, when you appeared on Mac Voices, I enjoyed the item that you had at the top of your wish list and adding media server to
oh goodness, yeah,
one of the features.
Yeah, if I were the product manager of OS X Server, I think that would be the very first thing that I would insist on is iTunes Server. It's when you look at what makes the server a viable product these days, I find that the biggest use case is caching server, and it's also the easiest feature to configure because there's just an on button and a slider for how many gigs you want to use, right? But what would make it super compelling for a lot more environments is definitely that caching server or the iTunes element, and that's really complicated. I tried to write that on my own 4 or 5 years ago, and there's a lot of moving parts, SQL databases and things like that, trying to keep all that stuff in sync. I abandoned the project, but at 318 we were talking about doing that as an open source project.
Yeah, I personally have fallen in love with the Synology product line and just have a couple of them now running in my home-based office, and they're my media servers, and they're just tremendous. I mean, I've got this one Synology box, and it's just running iTunes Server, and it has all the Christmas music on it. And then we have the other one that's just has all the regular music, because that was always a challenge. Like the more your Christmas library grew, you'd have to like prune it out at the end of the year, and like in the middle of January or July, you'd have some Christmas songs sort of just pop into a mix. But
Well, I think family sharing was really supposed to close that gap, and it's done a lot to do so. But I think that from video and movies and home movies and just there's so many other things that aren't purchased content that you want to distribute across everyone and share those playlists and. So between home sharing and family sharing, you've got, two pretty good features, but there's still a lot of gap in the middle, in my opinion. So hopefully this is one of those places where where I don't get in trouble talking about things that I shouldn't. Opinions, right? Earlier I said no, none of that.
I think you're safe. You're good. So
nobody's listening anyway.
So I have a quick side question to ask you just in terms of life itself. I mean, in the move to go to Jamf, you came from California and you're now in Minnesota, right?
Yeah. Well, so I moved to Minnesota about 6 or 7 years ago. And okay. I was splitting my time between Los Angeles and Minnesota. And so at first it was closer to half, and then it just slowly scaled back. Until it had gotten to about a week a month. And then when I made the change, now I'm here pretty much full time. And, when you're a traveling consultant, I mean, my years at 318, I was doing jobs at a lot of very large companies, which took me all over the world as opposed to just being based out of LA or just being based out of Minnesota or the two. And so I've been on the road for the better part of 20 years. And the chance to not really be on the road anymore was and also the chance to get involved with just building a whole new product and having it built my way and things enticing. Like that. It made sense to make that move. And I do miss the guys and gals at 318 because it's really a great crew. But and they're having their holiday party this week. So they're rubbing it in that I'm in the snow and they're on the beach. But
that's just mean.
I know, right? That's all right. I've gotten thicker skin living in the snow.
Yeah, well, we're in the Northeast. Not as bad as Minnesota, but we know what that's kind of like. But that's interesting. I mean, you spent so much time, so you weren't really in necessarily California a heck of a lot of time because you're always traveling the world. So you finally saw this opportunity to settle down, and now you can. How many kids do you have? You got one?
Just one, yeah.
Yeah, so now you can settle down and tuck your kid in at night.
Yep, it's fun. I'm missing those first steps and things like that. I don't have to miss all that anymore. So it's and honestly, at Jamf, as a consultant, you get exposed to a certain layer of the technology stack. And then as a developer, which I've gotten to become a bit more of a Java developer than I used to be. And so as a developer, product manager, et cetera, you end up getting exposed to a whole other level of the stack. And it's really intriguing how a lot of the developers aren't exposed to how the end users interact with the software. And a lot of the people who interact with the software aren't exposed to the developers. And there's sieves between those two, whether they're product managers or product owners or the guy in Office Space who's good with the people, So you have these sieves that those communications go through, but getting to kind of be in both worlds is really an awesome experience. So
now you're working. I mean, besides being on the developer side, you're working with. I guess what you're saying is some less technical people to understand, like for instance with Bushel, to understand their needs, whereas the last few years, I guess you've been working with highly technical people. So that kind of plays a role into your current book as well, right?
Yeah. I would say that I learned a lot about the cohort of customers that I'm working with in the process of writing this book. And some of these people might be extremely technical just with the Mac or just with an iPad, for example, but not really well-versed in the server side of things. And that was kind of the experience I got to have with Adam. And then some of the commentary that you get from the chapters or from the tidbits posts that went out. Those exposed you to a whole other level of user, and sometimes much higher, sometimes much lower. And then, over the course of being a product manager, you meet with focus groups and things like that. So getting exposure to people who are still much less technical. And learning to communicate with a whole other audience. Because I would say that the bigger the companies got that 318 was working with, the more technical people that I was dealing with and the less people on the business side, if that makes sense. So over the last maybe 10 years, I've pretty much just worked with pretty hardcore Mac admins. So get back into that exposure like I started in my early career with getting to work with just any old body is pretty awesome. So
very cool. Your career has run the gamut of all different aspects of IT.
Now it has. Yeah. Because before I got into the Mac side, I was more of a Unix guy. So it's been fun getting exposed to the Mac people and having come from that Unix background. I find that a lot of the developers that I work with now are much more similar to the old school Unix people that I worked with before. So they're all great people.
Nice.
To throw that out there in case anyone isn't sure what I think.
So Charles, when you're writing a preface to like the mail chapter, let's say, and you're warning people against maybe even considering following these instructions, but if they must, you're going to provide them. Who are you? Is there a user you're sort of picturing when you're writing that preface to that chapter? For me, it's Jerry's Nana, I think, usually.
Hey, she's a big listener to the show. Take it easy on Nana.
Before I answer that, I have to say, my grandmother is on Facebook, and she writes like for everything instead of clicking the like button, which I think is just
that's awesome.
a normal thing
That's
ever.
Lovely. That's lovely.
I love it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find that for each book, one of the very, very first steps before I even write the outline, I determine and document the target audience. And once you know who you're talking to, then you can just have almost a natural conversation with that person. So for this book, I was basically talking to Adam Inkst most of the time, and I was literally talking to Adam because as I would turn in chapters, he would respond, and we had a pretty good cadence of like one call a week for a little while we were banging these things out. For other books, it's been, I was at the school district in Nebraska, and I came up with, this person because I happened to be in front of them while I was communicating back and forth with the publisher about who we were going to write this book to. The iOS security book, the publisher was very upfront. Like, we want a book written for Windows admins or InfoSec admins coming into the Apple platform. So you can assume that they understand information security and write to the what's unique about Apple in that regard. So the more you can focus and hone in, the better, and that's true with any marketing message, right? Like, in any book, the more people you try to satisfy, the less of a good job you do satisfying those people in most cases, and so. So I just try to get that person in my mind, and then I can just have as natural a conversation with them as possible, delete all the commas, and the book's ready to go.
Sounds like a great recipe.
Yeah, those commas, man.
Right.
It's like verbal diarrhea on the page.
You just turn it in with literally no commas, just do like a find and replace, and then say, just, send it in to Adam and say, you just add commas wherever you want them.
My first book, no one told. I mean, I wrote my first book and just submitted it. I didn't even have a publisher when I wrote it, and the publisher was like, you don't have to. He manually went through and removed the second space between each period and the capital letter of the next sentence.
Right.
And I was like, there's a find and replace function.
I think you have to wait a certain amount of time before you actually tell somebody. Like, if he just spent like 3 or 4 hours actually doing that, you want to maybe wait a couple of weeks before you tell him about that find and replace option.
Just email him a link.
Right.
Just these days you'd tweet it, but Twitter didn't exist then.
So here's the most important question of our chat today. So it's the Talenti Gelato Sea Salt Caramel that is the one to get, because I've had a few of them, and that one is quite good.
Yeah, I do like this. I was eating that while I was writing that.
So if you go, if you go to cryptid.com, you'll see what we're talking about. There's I don't know if they have nationwide distribution, or it's just like we've got it in the Northeast here. It's in all our local grocery stores, and you got it there in Minnesota. So I don't know if the West Coasters have it, but Talenti Gelato.
Target's based in Minneapolis, so we get all the weird new things that Target's going to do, because we're one of their big test markets with their corporate headquarters, like a mile from my house.
So you can get ice cream at Target where you are?
Oh, yeah. Huh. Target sells everything.
See, we don't have that. We're
the super Targets, right?
We actually don't. We don't have this. We're deprived here.
Oh, yeah. So I've been trying to go up market.
Target, right? Target is what they call that. Yeah.
But it calls to me when you have a 6-year-old. It's like, I want Pokemon. Okay. Let's go to Target.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yes. See, Jerry, while you were reading in recently about the sea salt caramel or whatever you call it, I was reading about the trip to the Apple store that Charles took to get that airport. You guys got to check that out.
I did read that as well. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I took a stab at writing fiction, I guess. Or pseudo fiction, as the case may be.
So for all you listeners out there, you'll have to check out Cryptid and check out these stories for sure.
Yeah, I should do that more. It was very fun for me. Or maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. I hear silence on the other end.
No, it was good. That was definitely a great story. I read through the whole thing one morning. I was just like, this is awesome.
It's a good, read it with your coffee kind of story.
Yeah.
I find that the people who work in the Apple retail stores, they're the next generation of us, right? Like, so I find that watching them work and how well they're trained at Apple and how nice they are all the time, it's like, wow, the next generation of me is an improvement over me.
Charles Edge 2.0.
Yeah, they're also all better looking. It's very annoying.
That's youth, man.
Oh, there's going to be something in Charles's stocking from Apple. I can smell it already. With all these glowing remarks. We sometimes don't speak quite as glowingly about our experiences at the Apple store, and I've got one to share for a future show as well. So we have our challenges, but because. And I don't want to get off in the weeds on this, but we often talk about the fact that because we are consultants, we have to go in there and we have to be pretty gentle. And when things don't really go well in terms of, maybe having some piece of equipment in for repair, there's really not much we can do. We just have to kind of like swallow hard and move on.
Yeah, I remember those. I remember that life. I find that they always do the best they can. And sometimes we have customers that are putting pressure on us to, for example, get a MacBook Air back to them in a day. And the thing needs to go to Cupertino to get something replaced. So that's just not going to happen. And that's always frustrating to be the middle person. Sure. It would be easier if the customer just took it in, but they wouldn't be paying the consultant if they wanted to do that, right? So I remember that, and it was 318 became an Apple authorized service center because of that, and then later we decided that business kind of sucked, but and then we were much more I think forgiving when we went to the retail stores because we didn't have to deal with people bringing the stuff to us with, oh no, I didn't do anything. And you take the machine apart and you're like, wow, because it's full of cherry Coke on the inside. And I know it was cherry Coke because I had some. I was out of caffeine. Don't judge me. Being in other people's shoes, I guess, changes our perceptions.
Definitely true.
So I've got a couple of questions for you guys. Are you guys doing anything with DEP yet?
Yeah.
The device enrollment program stuff?
Yeah, actually.
Are you finding that it takes a while to get those devices, or are they shipping out pretty quick?
Let's see. I ordered one, I think fairly quickly. We ordered one through DEP last month, I think it was. And it didn't take too long to arrive. I mean, I just set it up the other day. Are you seeing delays on that end?
Nope, just curious. So when you did get it and you took it out of the box and it just set itself up, was that like magic? Were you just like, oh my God, that was the coolest thing that ever happened? Or
well, yeah, it was cool, but I mean, like we did have to do, put in that serial number into the DEP portal and assign it to one of our MDMs. But yeah, it's very cool once you set it up. And I actually just did a little video on this too, and it just says this device is being managed by HCS Technology Group. You're like, that's so awesome.
I know, right?
Yeah, so that is very, and that magic, and that's the piece that's going to be cool for the end users. That, well, may be cool, but that you don't have to touch the glass at all. You just ship a device directly to them.
And Sam, you were in a warehouse full of boxes and boxes of these iPads, right?
Yeah, that was, Charles, I'll show you a picture of, we were doing an Apple professional services gig, and there were thousands of iPads that we had to literally unbox. That they hired us, we showed up, and they paid us to unbox iPads. It was the craziest gig.
Wow. Was that a school?
Yeah, it was a school.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, back in my day, we gave the kids a quarter, and they'd do it for us.
See what you're missing, Charles?
I know. Or we'd set up an Unreal server, and they'd do it just to have time on the Unreal server.
Nice.
That happened. Nice. And pizza. You got to give kids pizza.
Of course.
That's how Sam gets paid too, though.
I get paid in sushi, Joe.
That's right, sushi. Sorry.
Oh, that's much more upmarket.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Charles, we would love to have you back sometime soon. We've got lots of listeners who have been begging us to do a live show. It may not prove to be very interesting for a lot of people because we might, as I'd mentioned, get off in the weeds with a lot of our listeners' questions. But hopefully we can do that, and maybe we could time it with the release of Bushel. I was going to say bundle. Excuse me.
Close enough. I'd love that.
And right now it's invite only, right? So people can go to Bushel and they can try out the beta.
Yes, but if you'd like, I can give you a special link that you can put on the site, and then people can get in without a code.
Brilliant.
Oh, great.
So, that's awesome. That'd be great.
Totally.
Is the code word Yeti?
The code word is Yeti.
That would be picture perfect if it was.
So we can find your writings at blog.bushel.com, as we mentioned earlier. We'll put this in the show notes, cryptid.com. And you're active on Twitter, right? That's probably one of your sounding boards?
Yep, at CEdge318 or CEDGE318.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Well, yeah, thanks again, Charles, for joining us. It's been a great interview, and do look forward to having you back after the release of Bushel.
Anytime, and thanks for having me. It's been a blast. I should do this more often.
Definitely.
Well, thank you. Again, you've been very generous with your time and also very generous over the years with all your posts, and you've gotten us out of a lot of jams. And again, we thank you for that, and we'll make sure there's stuff in your stocking.
My pleasure. Thanks for the kind words.